Hi, I'm Bob Cummings. I'm the CEO of LeapGreat. We help to speed up SAP implementations and remove the risk. And I'm a longtime SAP veteran, 35 years now. I've been doing SAP in some form or another, starting in 1990, and have been at SAP for 28 years in various positions. I'm very excited to continue the journey with a huge transition and that's moving the mass migration toward S/4HANA. Still loving the business as in the early days. A global rollout is essentially when a customer is trying to roll out to many countries around the world or many subsidiaries or divisions. And it's a big deal for companies because they start doing an implementation, but then they realize, doing one implementation is quite a different task than repeating it 50, 60 times for many countries. So it's really something that large companies deal with, but there are also smaller companies that have businesses in multiple locations or multiple countries who also look at doing global rollouts based on a template that they often use and then roll it out into different countries. A lot of the times people think if I've got my mother company running or I've got one pilot company running, it shouldn't be too difficult. We can just do copy and paste and go to the next country and use a template. But it's a lot more complicated than that because what ends up happening is the countries and the local businesses tend to be often quite different, even though at the surface, they don't look different. Over the years, their systems and their organizations and details have changed. And so often it's not as easy to just copy and paste and bring it into a new country. It's about communication and also about motivations because the challenge is that, you go through all the pain of implementing in one country and your feeling is, well, this won't be so painful for the other countries because we went through the pain, but you still have to do the change management in the new country. You still have to do all of that. Even if the system is working well, it is a big transformation for them. So a lot of times people think, oh, I'll first do the transformation, then I'll roll it out. The truth is when you roll it out, you're actually doing many transformations for the local companies, that are out there. So it is a challenging thing. And I've been involved with many of these over the years. And I would say one often underestimates the complexity of an implementation, but I always say one seems to underestimate the complexity of rollouts. It's always the temptation to think, oh, well, after that, it'll be easy. It isn't. It's often a lot of challenges on the way. Over the years, I also, even back in the old days when I was doing R2 implementations, I mean, the situation hasn't changed that much, right? I've seen three kinds of approaches to rolling out. And I would say the first two always seem to hit a wall and run into escalations and cause problems. And the third one seems to be kind of the best way. It's not something that was invented. It's just observing, best practices in the country. So if you have three different ways, the first way is a very typical one. One just chooses a country and the pilot country or pilot installation. You say, okay, we're going to implement this here first. And then after that, we're going to take that and we're going to copy and paste it into the rest of the world. Now that pilot might just be a subsidiary, or it might actually be, the worst is actually if you take the mother company, meaning the headquarters, because that's often much more complex and you transport the complexity into those countries. What I mean to say is, let's call that approach copy and paste, right? You do one and then you copy and paste into the rest of the world. Those really run into a lot of difficulties because one tends to ignore in the beginning, in the first implementation, what the differences are between countries. And one just say, hey, if it works over here, it should work for you. And then you run into a lot of problems with that. The second type is an approach I would just call it building the template in a lab, right? So what you do is you get a lot of experts, put them into a center of expertise or a laboratory environment or something, and say, okay, you guys go off and build a template and then we'll roll that out into the world, right? And so may have representatives from countries and they'll do something and then they'll roll it out. But often that runs into problems too, because it's not really tested in reality. It often loses a lot of the details. And so you run into a lot of problems in that way. The third way I would find, which I've always seen for those companies who do it in the best way, is when you have a center of expertise with experts and you work with minimum 2 countries as a pilot, where together with those, your goal is to actually build the template and get 2 countries up live first before you declare anything a template, right? And that that often has the dynamic that you're testing it in reality, you're checking differences, you're seeing what can be the lowest common denominator, and you bring that together. And once you have that, you've gone through a lot of the pains that the countries will go through, and then you can go into that rollout in a much better way. So I think that third way is the best way to approach that, One of the things that is also a challenge for rollouts, that is the challenge is once you've got your template and you want to start rolling out, what often happens is, let's say you have to do 30 countries, right, that you're going to go. And what often happens is they say, hey, let's do the first wave of countries, which will be these 5 to 10 countries or something. Then we'll have the second wave and you have a third wave. It doesn't just have to be countries. It could also be divisions or lines of business or something, but I'll just use countries to be simple. So let's say you have 30 countries and you say you divide into 3 batches and you have batch 1, batch 2, batch 3. The challenge is often if you're in wave 2 or 3, you have to wait for wave 1 to be done because they're very busy. The teams are very busy getting those. And so, of course, if you do wave 1 and then wave 2 and wave 3, you're talking about several years, right? Many years. And so if you're in a wave 3 country, you're looking at your watch and thinking, there's still going to be 3 or 4 years before I get my new system, and some people think, hey, the world will have changed by the time 3 or 4 years go by. There'll be restructuring or mergers and acquisitions, and then will it be right? So what we try to do is collapse the time. What we make possible is a kind of a parallelization of the waves. So we have a process called front-loading where you go into an implementation and using our tooling, you can front-load a system, which makes it very easy to visualize right in the beginning and do a refinement much more quickly of your system so you can implement faster. Now, what you can do is if you think front-load and then refinement, as soon as the front-load is finished, you can get them into refinement for the implementation and you can go to the next batch of countries. And while they're working, you can already front-load the next batch, right? And even while you're front-loading one batch of countries, you can get the others in as observers to see what's going on so that they can already start preparing themselves. So you can collapse the timelines so you don't have to waste so much time over so many years doing all these sequential rollouts, and you can be much more efficient. And that's one way we do it. So we're all about helping the country to be able to move much quicker with less risk and less cost, to move faster. And this helps a lot in rollouts. One is the time you save in an implementation itself or the time you save in a rollout in general, right? Now, we've seen very easily over a few years where a rollout was over 5 years or 6 years, and we can pull 2 years out of that through a parallelization. And then if you have a project which was slated for 18 months, we've seen you can easily bring that down to 11 to 12 months, for that. So I would say in general, we can at least take a 30% savings out of there. We've seen it go up to 50% savings in that, in terms of time, effort, speed. But I think the really big thing that we're really about is helping the customer take the risk out of these projects. It's not just about speed and cost. It's also these projects can go wrong. If you look in the internet and you Google ERP risk, you'll see a lot of frightening literature, which shows that, most projects hit a wall. And there are many things you can do to avoid that hitting a wall. So that's what we're about. The thing that's most frustrating when I look at SAP implementations is that we've been doing this stuff for 50 years. ERP is nothing new. It's been around for half a century. And you think these projects would be much, much easier today. In many aspects, through new technologies, aspects have become easier, but at the same time, we've invented so many other layers and tools of other things that come into there. So the projects have become much more complex. And all the technologies there actually in place, and even the skills are in place to do these projects much simpler and much faster and much more effectively. And I think the frustration we've had over the years is just that even though we've seen over many years examples of projects who get it right and do it really quickly, you don't have that transfer of knowledge that then you might just as well 5 years later have a project that runs into the same problem as it did back in the 90s, right? And What we're trying to do is connect all the dots, pull those technologies together, pull the skills together that allow a company and even a guided system to help you guide you through, just like when you set up your new PC at home or when you set up a television, nowadays you get smart TVs, you just turn them on and it guides you on what you have to do next, right? Um, I think that is really, in a sense, what the world is looking for is a way to say, hey, why can't these systems, after so many implementations over so many decades, why can't it be that I install it and it guides me and tells me what to do next, right? So we're trying a little bit to solve that problem for the customer by creating navigation and help and approaches that help to make the process not only smoother, but I will make a bold statement and say, even bring the joy back into these projects. Because I have seen in the early years when there was actually a lot of excitement in these projects. When you start one of these projects, you see the power that these systems have, right? SAP is a very, very powerful tool to make your company excel. But often what we've seen is people today don't have that excitement anymore. They have the fear and dread of touching those systems because they're so complex. We would like to take that fear away and bring the excitement back and make it so that you can actually get back to focusing on value rather than focusing on survival in these projects. If I were to sit in front of a team that's about to start a global rollout, what I would most likely start with is by saying, let's forget for a moment the technology. Let's think about the change management and the people. Let us think about the challenge of bringing thousands and thousands of people into this new system, right? Because that is the thing that is forgotten often. And I would say, let's start with that and work backwards from there. Because a lot of people think, well, at the end, when the system works, we'll just train the people up and everybody will be happy. It's often not like that, right? The soft things are the hard things, I always say in these projects. It's the training, it's the end user documentation, it's buy-in from the different organizations. And I would first talk about that challenge and say, let's just talk about that and imagine we had to do that. And now let's walk backwards from there and say, what needs to be in place for a successful change management on a global basis, because that will then define what we do in the technical design of the system. One usually does these things completely the other way around. One focuses on the technology first and thinks the rest will take care of itself. That rest is usually where the big escalations lie,